How's it going, everybody? Bryan Alvarez here on Wrestling Observer Live. We're going to be here for the next 2 hours talking pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. I am going to be flying solo here for about 10 minutes. Dave Meltzer will be on the line at about 5:15. And then at some point in the second hour, we're going to be joined by Mick Foley talking a bunch of different subjects. I know he's going to be on the Raw show tomorrow night. And he also spent some time in WWE developmental a couple of weeks ago and got to see firsthand what was going on in Ohio Valley and Florida Championship Wrestling, so we'll be talking to him about that coming up in just a few minutes. You can call in 1-800-878-PLAY. You can send emails to bryan@WrestlingObserver.com. We'll be taking your phone calls and emails throughout the evening, so anything you want to talk about, pro wrestling or MMA, call in or send an email, and we will talk about it here on this show. I wanted to mention before we get into most of the other news that it was kind of interesting when the show started and listening to the opener done by John McCarthy, and he retired last night. Retired actually may not be the best word. The Clay Guida fight on the Ultimate Fighter finale last night was likely Big John McCarthy's final refereeing gig for the foreseeable future. I think a lot of people expect him to make some sort of return, maybe at UFC 100 or something like that. But that was scheduled to be his final night refereeing. He will be taking a job with the Fight Network. He's got a fancy title, and he will be doing he'll be an analyst for the station, basically, the Fight Network up in Canada. So that was pretty much his final gig as a referee, and it was kind of interesting because they didn't really say anything about it. They just came out there and he did his job, and that was the end of that. So kind of sad in many ways, and we'll talk to Dave about that here in a little while. If you did not see that show last night, the Ultimate Fighter finale, I urge everybody to do so, whether you're a pro wrestling or MMA fan. It was a great show. Even those of you that don't like mixed martial arts, I think that you'd really like that show. Particularly, there were two matches on the show that were just out of this world. The Clay Guida fight with Roger Huerta was maybe the best fight of the entire year, and the J-Rock versus War Machine match was an incredible match as well. And both of them really, it's something you could almost watch if you're somebody getting into pro wrestling, if you want to be a pro wrestler, just to watch the drama of a real fight and a real comeback. In both cases, there was a real comeback, particularly the Clay Guida fight, where he was down, actually he was up in the scorecards, Clay Guida, and Roger Huerta made a big comeback in the third round and knocked him down with a shot and choked him out, and it was an incredible finish to an incredible fight. Just unbelievable. And we'll talk to Dave about that as well, because I know that he loved the show, and it was a winner. Running down a bit of news today, as noted, we were talking about the Ultimate Fighter finale, which aired last night. If you missed the show, it's going to be airing, I believe, this Friday at 9 o'clock p.m. on Spike TV, and then Saturday at 4 o'clock p.m. on Spike TV. So if you missed that show, I urge you to go out of your way to see it. It was tremendous. Tomorrow, of course, is the Raw 15th anniversary show, and this is coming just a couple of days after Raw and USA signed a 2-year contract extension, which is a very interesting story for a number of reasons. If you'll recall, the last 2 contract extensions they signed one in 2000 with with Spike TV that was a 5-year deal, and then they signed this new deal with USA, and this new deal is a 2-year deal, which I guess the question is, whose idea was it to sign a 2-year deal? Was it USA's idea? Was it WWE's idea? What does it mean if USA was only willing to do 2 hours or 2 years? What does it mean if WWE was only willing to do 2 years? There are a lot of different questions here, but it is a 2-year deal, and I think it was probably in it wasn't WWE's favor. They actually got a better licensing deal than they got for this previous contract, and if you've looked at the ratings today as compared to the ratings the first time they were on USA, it's actually quite baffling that they managed to get a better deal this time around. So that's the new deal for Raw and USA. They'll be on the network through 2010, and it is kind of interesting. I don't know if there's anything to this, but it's just interesting to note that the Raw contract with USA ends the year that the TNA contract with Spike TV ends. So there may be another, a battle between the two stations at some point down the road. for WWE programming, perhaps an effort to play both sides against each other by WWE. We'll find out in 2010, but it is sort of interesting that both contracts come up at that point. The 15th anniversary show tomorrow, it's a big show. They've got a whole bunch of different things planned, and I guess we'll go over all of that here very quickly. The biggest thing, obviously, is the return of Hulk Hogan, and Hogan has had a lot of issues lately, a number of different issues. Obviously, his son Nick is going to be involved, or he is involved in some legal issues as it regards the crash that left his friend John Graziano in a vegetative state probably for the rest of his life. And Hogan and Linda are also getting a divorce, so it's a very tough time for him. He is coming back to TV in January for the new American Gladiators, but he's making his big return tomorrow night to WWE. And the interesting thing about this is it's the first time in a long time that Hulk Hogan has been in a position where the bargaining power is in the hands of Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon is calling the shots at this point because Hulk Hogan clearly needs WWE far more than WWE needs Hulk Hogan at this point. So it was kind of funny this past Monday night on Raw. I didn't really understand it at the time, but the more I thought about it, I'm sort of starting to figure out what Vince McMahon did here. But Vince just threw out his name. He was having a meeting with Coach, and he was talking about these big plans that they had for the show this coming Monday. And he said, we're going to have a lot of big returns, including Hulk Hogan. And then he just started throwing out different names, and I thought, that's weird that he would just throw that name out there like that, like it means nothing. And I think that what it was probably I don't want to say a ploy, but sort of a message on the part of Vince McMahon, just saying, Hulk, you're just another guy. We're bringing you here onto this show. I'm the dude in charge, and this is the way things are going to be. So already games being played, I would guess, by Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan, but he's coming back tomorrow night. And I think if it were anybody else that had been in the media so much in the last couple of months because of all the issues that he's having, I think if it were anybody else, it would be kind of a danger to put them out on live TV and have fans there that could chant anything that they wanted or hold up any sort of signs they may create. But I think that with Hulk Hogan, because he's Hulk Hogan, because it's the 15th anniversary show, he's going to come out and he's going to be over huge. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. And I would think that if there's a plan to do something with Hogan at Mania, they'll do something tomorrow. I would not expect anything with Steve Austin, which is what a lot of people are speculating, but I don't think Steve Austin has any desire to ever do a match with Hulk Hogan no matter what. So I wouldn't expect that tomorrow, but I would expect something if they want to do something. The other thing with a Hogan match at Mania is it is in the Florida market, and Nick Hogan thing is huge, obviously, in the Florida market because that's where everything went down. So there is the possibility that they may feel that that's not the place to do it, or they may just figure it's Hulk Hogan, he's going to be over huge because it's wrestling. Hogan at WrestleMania is going to work, so let's not worry about it. Plus, you'll have so many people coming in from around the country that it may not be a big deal. So that's his big return tomorrow. You've also got the returns of Steve Austin, Mick Foley, Eric Bischoff, Lita, Trish Stratus, and Sunny. Yes, Demi Stitch is returning to WWE. All of them, and actually a number of other individuals as well. We don't have all of the names, but a ton of people who have been on Raw. I can't say everybody because it's certainly not everybody, but a lot of people that have been on Raw over the past 15 years are going to be on the show tomorrow. They're going to be doing, I believe, a 20-man battle royal with a bunch of former Raw superstars. And we've also got, like I said, some more surprise returns. We've got a one-night reformation of Evolution, which is Triple H, Randy Orton, Batista, and Ric Flair. And, of course, Hunter, Batista, and Ric Flair, all currently babyfaces. Orton's a heel. I don't know what they're going to do, whether it will be a match or just some sort of reunion in mid-ring, but I would expect that they would shoot an angle tomorrow, probably involving Triple H and Batista, because I think that's going to be one of the main events. At least that's planned as of, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, Triple H and Batista at WrestleMania, and so they would have to set that up. And I think that I don't think it'll happen on the show tomorrow, but I think very, very shortly Batista's going to be turning heel. Just from watching the SmackDown show and the way that he was doing commentary, and basically during commentary on an interview he said he was very confident. He gained a lot of confidence in his matches with The Undertaker. He felt he could beat Edge. Basically, they're doing an overconfident storyline with Batista, and I think that suggests that he's going to lose in the three-way on Sunday and drop the title, and probably either at that pay-per-view or sometime shortly thereafter, perhaps turn heel. So I guess you'd have a heel Batista and a babyface Triple H at WrestleMania unless something changes there. But I would expect them to shoot some sort of angle for that tomorrow night during this reformation. So that is that. And we've also got a ladder match, Jeff Hardy and Carlito, which is interesting because Carlito originally was going to quit the company. He had given his notice. He was going to resign. A lot of talk that he would split his time between TNA and his father's promotion in Puerto Rico, which is not a bad schedule if you're Carlito. He was very frustrated with a lot of things in WWE and a lot of the ways that he was used over the past couple of years, and it was kind of it was an interesting situation because his attitude seemed to be, when I'm not being pushed hard, I'm not going to give it my all in the ring. And unfortunately, when he didn't give it all his all in the ring, he wasn't pushed to the level that I guess he felt that he should be pushed at. So it was sort of a weird situation. He gave his notice. Vince McMahon ended up sitting down with him and talked him into returning. So may have promised him the Intercontinental title. I don't know. It sort of makes sense that they might do something like that tomorrow on the show, a title change, because it's the big 15th anniversary show. But Jeff Hardy and Carlito in a ladder match, presumably for the Intercontinental title. That's one of the big matches on the show tomorrow. And then we've got I guess it's the main event of the show. It's Vince McMahon introducing the biggest Raw superstar of all time. And if you go to WWE.com, there is a huge list of individuals that you can vote for as the biggest Raw superstar of all time. And I would be stunned if Vince did not choose himself as the biggest Raw superstar of all time. And I think it's pretty much inevitable that at the end of the show, Vince McMahon is going to be humiliated. I'm sure he'll get a stunner by Steve Austin. I'm sure he'll, probably get a leg drop by Hulk Hogan, and probably a number of other things as well. So that will be the big blow-off angle of the show tomorrow. So, Dave, what's going on?
Not too much. How you doing?
Not too bad. What did you think of the Ultimate Fighter finale?
Oh, God, one of the best shows of the year. That was, that was quite a night last night, 6 straight hours of fights.
So you actually watched, I didn't get a chance to watch the De La Hoya Mayweather pay-per-view, so, I mean, what did you think of the fight?
You mean the Hatton fight, or you didn't watch
Hatton fight, sorry. Okay. You may have watched De La Hoya as well, I don't know.
I did watch that, as a matter of fact, yeah. Yeah, we had people
fight. How was
it? We watched the boxing first, and then we watched the MMA, and the one thing, I mean, that and Thursday was interesting because in both cases, you were kind of like watching two things, one right after the other. They actually went on head-to-head, but, you know what I mean.
Are you talking ECW and TNA?
Yeah, ECW and TNA, and it's just interesting the comparisons when you watch those two things. Like we talked about this before with ECW and TNA. I mean, TNA had the better wrestling. They had the hotter crowd. They basically had bigger star power and all that. Yet when you watch ECW, which is not a good show by any means, after TNA, the one thing is that it really exemplifies the problems of TNA in the sense that when TNA is over, you don't remember anything, and when ECW is over, I mean, there isn't much good, but you do remember everything on the show.
That's true. And the Big Daddy V. Kane feud really sticks in your head after a while.
Well, that's, I didn't say everything good, but I mean, I just an example, I felt that, watching Shelton Benjamin on ECW and Booker T on TNA, that I got, I felt more of an impact by Shelton Benjamin, even though Booker T is 10 times the star. Because Booker T was just a guy in the mix. His wife got more lines than he did. And, he was just one of 5 guys and, on a team. And Shelton Benjamin had, specific promo. You could very clearly see that Shelton Benjamin is being, built for a feud with CM Punk. It's very simple stuff that is, I mean, I don't want to say it's effective, but it's got a better chance of being effective than 50 angles in 2 hours. But so last night, when the boxing was over and we switched to the MMA, I mean, and I had a big group of people over. I mean, it was really interesting about how, and this was the George fight, which was because of when the Hatton fight ended. George Soteropoulos' fight with Billy Miles was in the ring, and it was like, this is so much better than boxing. And I mean, when we all grew up on boxing, and I know that there's a lot of there's big advantages of boxing, and obviously no MMA match has ever been as big a match as this boxing match was, and the crowd at the boxing match was probably the greatest crowd that I've ever seen at a United States, boxing match, pro wrestling match, maybe It'd be up there with the top pro wrestling crowds, and top UFC crowds, maybe even better. I mean,
really that good a crowd?
It was a absolutely fantastic crowd. I mean, I was so that aspect obviously it beat UFC hands down, but fight quality, my God, UFC just, I mean, this was the night where Joe Silva's the genius. You know what I mean?
We talked about this a little bit after the De La Hoya fight, in that you paid $54.95 for the De La Hoya pay-per-view, and you really got one fight. I mean, that was a show where I think that most everybody watched it was just getting something to eat during the entire undercard. And on this show,
everyone with me, nobody paid attention to the undercard. It was almost like it was painful, like watching Andre the Giant and John Studd or something. I mean, it was Kane and Big Daddy V. I mean, it wasn't as painful as Kane and Big Daddy V, I will say that. But I mean, it's just like there was no interest whatsoever, and you throw those guys in UFC out there, the prelim guys, and people were into every single fight. And we didn't see Saunders and Barrera until about 1 a.m., so that was because we had to watch that on the replay. But even so, it was more interesting than anything except for the main event on the boxing match. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a little different this time because at least the entire undercard was guys that you just seen on a reality show for 12 weeks. But still, even on your generic UFC show, I mean, they still do what they can to try and at least fill up some of the undercard. I mean, it's almost never just a one-fight show, and if it is, it's because something went wrong.
Part of that also is because you're a bigger MMA fan than a boxing fan, as am I. So, because I knew I knew the names of the guys in the semi-main, and I knew, I knew who they were. They just had a boring fight.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the issues right there. And the other thing though is I had friends over that didn't watch the season of Ultimate Fighter at all, and they didn't know the guys. And you don't have to know anyone for that J-Rock fight, with War Machine. I mean, that was. I just felt sorry for them because if it was any other night, I mean, everybody would be talking about it like match of the year, and then when it was over, everyone's going like, that was a pretty darn good fight, but, everybody was really talking about the main event when the show was over.
I think also that you're getting a new generation of fighters who are starting to learn that it is more important to have an exciting fight and to go all out than to necessarily win the fight. Because I really think that if you asked a lot of people today, who won the John Jarrett fight, I'm not necessarily sure that everybody would be able to immediately give you an answer. They would just remember that it was an awesome fight.
Mm-hmm. Personally, I thought that the guy who came off of the show last night as the biggest star was Clay Guida, not Huerta. I just thought he had so much. He's got something. I mean, I just see he's got a look, and he's got the way he acts and everything like that. And then when it was over, it was almost like. Like watching in Japan does this one very well, where you have, kind of the underdog, and he's winning, and he's winning, and he's winning, and in the end, he goes against a veteran who's, he's not going to beat, but he just gives you this ride where, Ric Flair used to be real good at this when Ric Flair was a champion in the 80s, where he'd give the challenger the whole match, and you just know what's happening, and then at the end, he pulls it off. And it's a great story, it was real, but it was a great story. And I just thought Clay Guida in that role he was just tremendous. And I felt so bad for him. I never, get that kind of a feeling watching a fight where, it's like the guy loses, and I guess you feel bad for the guy who loses, but that's the fight team. But this guy, it was like, when it was over, it was like, I just wanted to see a rematch. I wanted to see him, fight again against any, whether it's Frankie Edgar or Tyson Griffin, or anyone, the top guys at 155. I would have rather seen Clay Guida get a title shot than Huerta. Even though, the way they do things, that's, he's 2-3 in UFC, he's not getting any title shots soon, but he's also, even though he's 2-3 in UFC, I will guarantee he's going to be on a regular rotation of fighters, for the next year or so off of that fight.
Yeah, I would think at least a year, maybe even 2. And, I think that, I don't think you should take too much away from Roger Huerta because obviously, he won, and he hung on through 2 rounds, and there wasn't anything fluky about it. He beat the guy, so
he won clean, and he has showed a lot of guts coming back from just being mystified for 2 straight rounds, and just not getting anything off, and he didn't get broken mentally, and that guy carried a fast pace on him, and I think that the other good thing is I think Roger Huerta, you have to say he shut up critics. You really do. I mean, some people might still say he's overrated and all that, but you know what? It's like he's pretty darn good, because if he wasn't good, he'd have been blown out in that fight.
It's actually getting to the point now where he's become that guy where you have to ask, what do you have to do to not be, to not have people say that about you at this point?
Yeah, I mean, he probably has to win the championship or something. Some people...
I think even if he won the title, he'd find something.
Some people would. Well, you're right, because we've seen it with other fighters too. When you get that reputation of being not as good, and then all of a sudden you prove that you really are. People get real weird about that. And we're just somewhat going to face that. But he's the real deal. And I mean, yeah, he was given and he was given easier opponents coming in, and they want to market him, and they want him to be the big star when they go to Mexico. We know all that, and it's like, to me, it's not his fault that he's marketable. You know what I mean? It's like, there's some people that get mad because certain people do get that, and that's the nature of the fight game. It's the nature of it's the entertainment world. It's in every entertainment event. Some guys are just going to have something where the promoter feels that they are marketable in a certain way, and you're going to try to push them. And you shouldn't hold it against them, because those are the guys who carry the business more than the guys who may be more talented, because we both know talent, whether it's in any of the endeavors we talk about, talent is a very small part of it. It's better to be that guy that everyone remembers than to be that guy that no one remembers who's, but
very good at what he does.
But is really good at what he does, and is technically the best out there. It's better to be some guy, that, look at what Tank Abbott makes. He's a complete bum, but everyone knows his name, so, yeah. I mean, we've been talking about that. We'll talk about that one forever, because that's just the nature of, it's an unfortunate nature, because I think sports fans don't like it, but it's an unfortunate nature of what the entertainment industry is, and it's, this is entertainment. It's not pure sports, because if it's pure, it can't survive as pure sports. If it did, all these IFLs and EXCs and everybody would be surviving just because people want to see fights. They want to see people they know, and they want to see names.
It was actually the John Copenhaver-Jared Rollins fight that as soon as it was over, I thought, God, that right there was pro wrestling. You had a guy called the War Machine. You had a guy called J-Rock. They had a fantastic battle. You had one guy it looked like he was nearly unconscious with exhaustion, and he made a huge comeback and won. And I was just like, wow. I mean, that right there that was awesome.
It was, the whole fight was great, but the finish, I mean, my God, in both fights. But that one, because, he took those knees and everything, and I thought, he's, what I mean? It was like, okay, he was finally done, and then he ended up winning. But that's one of the real pluses of, the fight game in this sport especially is anyone can win, and a guy can be, we've seen it many times, a guy can be on the verge of losing, and 10 seconds later he's just won the fight.
Dave, your thoughts on the 15th anniversary show tomorrow?
I'm sure it'll be interesting. I think it's going to be too much McMahon's, but, we're going to get a bunch of nostalgia stuff, and I presume that we'll get enough good wrestling and hopefully enough good promos and a lot of star power and, probably too much star power. I remember when they did one of the season opening shows a couple of years ago. Maybe it was the first show when they were on USA. And I thought, or actually it wasn't the first, it was one of the anniversary shows. And I felt the same way I kind of feel with this one, in the sense that they should, instead of doing it all in one show, if they spread this stuff out in like 10 shows, you'd have 10 good shows. But that's not the way they're going to do it. The one thing I thought also interesting is the show that they're going to make the most money on this month is Armageddon. And yet nobody is looking for an Armageddon more than this. And to me, there's a problem there. I mean, it seems like backwards. It's completely backwards.
It is funny, because when I watched Raw on Monday, the show went off the air. It wasn't a great show or anything like that, but the way that they put everything together, I sat there and I thought, that was a pretty good go-home show for the pay-per-view. And then I realized, pay-per-view ain't this Sunday. It's the Sunday after.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I don't know if they figured, like, we'll get our go-home show out of the way, and then we'll just do this big special standalone 3-hour show, but it doesn't seem like the best idea for getting people to buy your pay-per-view.
Yeah, but, I mean, a lot of this is, to build a big audience and to shoot some WrestleMania angles and things like that, or to begin the teasers for WrestleMania angles. So, I mean, it's going to be, the most important Raw show, until, I don't know when they really get into high gear for Mania, when, January, February, when they start, coming up with the big angle or the big celebrity or whatever it is that they're, going to be working with.
I wasn't sure about the rating. We were discussing this the other night, and I think you said a 4.2 or something like that, and I was thinking around a 3.9.
No,
I'm thinking maybe 4.1 may be the right answer now.
What?
I've seen a lot of hype for this show, and I think people are interested. So I would guess a 4.1.
It's still going against football.
That's true.
I could see anywhere from a 3.9 to a 4.2, somewhere in that range. But what does it matter? You know what I mean?
Well, they get one big rating here and there, and everybody's happy for a day.
The next week will be back to a 3.5 either way, or 3.4, or whatever it's going to be.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not, if it's something that's going to build momentum for something, that's one thing, but if it's a standalone great rating a week later, it doesn't really mean a whole lot.
What do you think of the chance of anybody being so impressive tomorrow that they get hired?
I think there's a good chance of that. I don't know who it would be, but remember Marty Jannetty?
Well, I was actually thinking about that today. There were a number of guys who had matches with Kurt Angle, and they were all immediately signed, and then proceeded to do absolutely nothing of any value.
How did Tonka get signed?
He had a match with Kurt Angle.
Was it with Kurt Angle?
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Because that became the joke. Because he got Marty Jannetty and Tatanka signed,
and then they never did anything with either of them after.
Well, they didn't have those matches
Marty
anymore.
screwed himself. So.
Sure.
But then again, you know what? Before he screwed himself, he was under contract for months, and they never even put him on TV because they couldn't figure out what to do with him.
Are you talking to Tatanka?
No, Marty Jannetty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so.
I was really hoping that the actual Marty Jannetty would have been back on Raw this past Monday night, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, it would have been funny.
We are going to go to Ray in Toronto, who actually wants to talk about Raw. So, Ray, what's going on?
Hey, guys, how's it going?
How you doing?
Not too bad. I wanted to ask now if we're talking a possibility of Hogan maybe building something to WrestleMania. You think they may try and do that Hogan Big Show thing again? You think he might be on Raw tomorrow as well to shoot something with Hogan?
I don't think Big Show's going to be on tomorrow. I mean, I suppose it's possible. As far as if Hogan comes back and wants to work with Big Show, would Big Show come back? Yeah, Big Show will do whatever Hogan asks. So if that's what Hogan wants, kind of a year too late in that one, but it's someone Hogan's comfortable with, and it's someone Big Show's comfortable with, who, he can come back, and, working with Hogan, it's not going to ruin his back any worse. Yeah, I could easily see that happening, yeah.
Okay. Anything new on Big Show doing boxing?
Big Show was training for boxing. I don't think he's ever going to box. That's just my gut from knowing people who know him. He might. There was a lot of things. Hogan was actually tied into that. I think one of the reasons that the promoters were offering Big Show so much money was the idea that Big Show would box and Hulk Hogan would be his manager. And if Hulk Hogan's going back with Vince McMahon, that makes that not happen. So it's kind of double crosses the boxing people that were with Big Show, which wouldn't be the first time Hogan's done something like that.
Anything else, Ray?
Yeah, I saw on that Ron Killing said on his MySpace that he's him and TNA have come to a mutual understanding of his release, and he wants to go back to his old stomping grounds.
Mm-hmm.
Is that back to WWE or somewhere else?
AAA.
AAA. If WWE wants him, he'll go there. If they don't, then he'll go to AAA. That's kind of what's up with him.
Okay, thank you.
What do you think after the last couple of days about the new 2-year deal with WWE and USA?
I didn't expect him to go anywhere else, so I don't really think much about it. It just keeps everything the status quo. I mean, USA wants to be the #1 rated cable network. You take WWE out of the picture, and you're fighting for #1, and probably not. With WWE, you're pretty much, I don't say guaranteed because TV's, there's no guarantees in the TV business, but you're in a lot better shape when you've got that 52 weeks of doing, whatever the number is going to be, a 3.5 to a 4.0, rating.
Did 2 years surprise you?
Yeah, I guess that would, just because of the brevity of it. You would think that if you were, in something like this, you want to get it over with, and you don't want to, like all the WWE's previous deals. I mean, this USA deal was a 3, and then they come back with a 2. But before, they were always going with 5s. So I would have thought, if you're going to do an extension, 5. But I'm not sure which group, got cold feet on the years. So, but yeah, I guess mildly surprised that if you're going to do an extension, it was only 2 years.
I would think it would have been the WWE side that would have said 2, just because when I guess they mentioned that the licensing deal that they got was actually better than the ones they have now. So it would seem weird for USA to give them a better deal than they have now, but only go 2 years.
Well, here's the deal. That ends in 2010. I believe that TNA's deal, does it end in 2010?
I think it's September of 2010.
There you go.
So
maybe WWE is looking for this thing to end when TNA's deal ends, and then they can,
or just play both sides.
And then play both sides, and perhaps if they play both sides, get the deal they want from Spike, they end their competition at the same time without buying them.
Yeah.
TNA's not going. I don't see USA taking TNA, and I don't see another network taking TNA. And they may, I can't say that, but probably it'd be difficult. So that may be there may be a method to that madness, and that may be it. And then Spike, the idea that Spike would have both WWE and UFC at that point. I think that Spike would love that kind of a tag team, because then Spike's going to be a top 5 network all of a sudden, which which they obviously will not be without WWE.
Although 2 years is a long time for UFC. I mean, it could really go either way. I mean, it could be just as huge or even bigger, or they could see a big, obviously this year wasn't the best year they've ever had, at least compared to 2006, but things change fast.
Hey, well, but wrestling too. They could say, they could still WCW this ship, you know what I mean? I don't think they will, but...
So that would take an immense amount of talent. TNA can't even WCW their own promotion.
Well, what happens, again, you never know. I mean, people have lost their minds before that have been in power.
True.
There's tastes change. I mean, I don't see it happening, especially because WWE is basically a monopoly business, which WCW never was. So, the people, like before when they ran people off, a lot of those people went to WWE or WWF. This one, when they run people off, they just don't become fans. But they have run a lot of people off, but they've done a great job of recruiting new kids for all the adults they've run off. That's kind of been what's the story of the last year. So, who's to say, what if they didn't have John Cena? You know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, their ratings have held up okay without him, and their house show business has held up okay without him. But, long term, what if, something happened to that guy, where he, had an injury where he couldn't go, and the people really knew he wouldn't be back. And, Shawn's not getting any younger. Triple H can be hurt on any given day. The injury rate was horrible this last year, and we both know that wasn't luck. That was just the nature of it's going to be that way, is because of the nature of guys getting older and guys being on roids and guys working really hard on a hard schedule, and they break down.
What do you think at this point about the chances of Cena being healthy for WrestleMania?
I don't know. I haven't really talked to anyone about it. I mean, it was considered very, very unlikely. I know he's on Tribute to the Troops show, so obviously he's doing a little bit better. Mania, I mean, if he can do it, he'll do it. You know that he's a gamer, so to speak. So I haven't heard anyone on it, and I know that the plans for WrestleMania, as far as all the main eventers and everything like that, Cena's not figured in. Now, obviously, those plans are going to change 15 times between now and February and March anyway. So if he's ready, they'll fit him in.
Let's go to Steve from Pennsylvania, who has a question about Japan. Steve, what's up?
Hey there. Good evening, gentlemen. I have 2 questions, actually, which are kind of old-school questions, but still. You, Dave, rated the Kazuo Yamazaki match against Nobuhiko Takada 5-star match. I don't know a lot about Kazuo Yamazaki. Was he a big-time player in Japan?
Well, that match was on. I saw that match live 23 years ago, and it was just a different style, and it was so incredible live. I don't know that it would look great on tape. I haven't watched the match in 23 years on tape. I doubt it would. I doubt it would hold up now. But in the building that night, I mean, you know, they were doing a whole. You know, UWF was doing a completely different type of wrestling, and the place was just going crazy for it. Yamazaki was, you know, he had some good stuff over his career, you know, with New Japan and everything, and he was never a superstar, but he was the kind of a guy who had, you know, he had points in his career where he was pushed and did well and had a lot of good matches, both in the various UWFs and later UWFI, and then later in his career with New Japan. He, you know, was certainly a star, never a superstar. But I mean, with him and Takada, they kind of started together, and you know, we always knew Takada was really going to be the superstar, but at that point in time, they were kind of, you know, considered even, so to speak. You know, and Takada obviously had the charisma and the look and everything, and outshined him and became the, you know, when in the UWFI days in particular, became the real superstar, where Yamazaki was just you know, another guy on the card.
I also have another question. I don't know if you know this. It's also a kind of old school question, but do you know which were the bookers for All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling? Because I watched a lot of tapes from them. It's almost as good as Baba on his prime, you know, in terms of great booking. I don't know if you know who was the booker of All Japan Women's.
It depended on the time period, but a lot of the booking was done by the senior wrestlers. Rossy Ogawa did some of the booking. I mean, Aja Kong did some of the booking when she was on top. Hokuto did some booking. I guess technically Rossy Ogawa was he was more public relations. And the Matsunagas did at certain points. It was but yeah, I think you know, I'm not sure. Rossy Ogawa, I think, was the guy during the peak period who was doing a lot of the booking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that was my question, because watching some of the stuff from them, it's just like, you know, people talk about Giant Baba's ability to book wrestling, but, you know, in All Japan Women's, we just see angles that were so just from the 80s, you know, you would have thought they would still work nowadays, and were done 20 years ago and were awesome. So that's just unbelievable what they've done 20 years. So
yeah, they were that promotion. I think historically, probably as far as its peak, will probably historically not get its due because you know, it died and everything like that. But to get women's wrestling as popular as they got women's wrestling, and the characters over the way they got the characters, you know, I mean, no one's ever done it before, and I don't know that anyone will ever do it again. You know, as far as that was a really tremendous promotion, and it's, you know, that it's during its two peak periods, during the 80s, mid 80s peak period and the early 90s peak period.
Dave, your thoughts on the retirement of John McCarthy?
I thought it should have been handled better on television. You know, as far as, because I don't even, was it even mentioned?
I heard nothing.
I mean, I was listening for it, and I sure heard nothing. So, yeah, I thought that from a public standpoint should have been done better. I mean, as far as the reasons and everything like that, you know, he's going to be a main player at the Fight Network, and they're looking at expanding, and he's a good name for them. So, just a better job offer. So there's nothing, you know, there's nothing in that sense that's anything. I just thought.
Were they upset at him for taking this offer?
What?
Were they upset at him for taking the offer?
I don't think so, because it's how could they be? You know what I mean? I mean, he was not an employee of Zuffa, and you know, he was assigned by athletic commissions, and you know, he was part of it. But at the same time, if he was going to become a reporter on the sport as a full-time job, you really can't referee at that point. So it was just a natural. It's just something that happened that needed to happen for, you know, that for him to take the next step in his life.
You know, I also wanted to ask you, the WWE website is doing a bunch of polls actually, about different Raw moments, and one of them is the best match poll, and one of the options involves a match with Chris Benoit. Did that surprise you that made it up there?
Yes. Is it Benoit and Jericho against Triple H and Steve Austin?
I actually don't know what it is.
Okay.
Just so that I think about it. I'll find out.
The best Raw matches, that's one of the ones that, boy, I remember that one. The one in San Jose, whatever year it was, 2001, I think. I mean, there's been a lot of great, there's been obviously in 15 years, there better have been a lot of great Raw matches, and there sure were, but that's right up there with the best ones.
Yeah, and I guess on the Ray DVD as well, there was a mention to Benoit that they didn't edit out, so I don't know if they're softening the stance or what the deal might be.
I think that the time was going to do that no matter what. And
it was the Benoit Angle cage match.
The Benoit Angle cage match where Angle did the moonsault.
Yeah, blew out his knee.
That was a good match too. That was a really good match.
So you basically think that time was going to heal this wound?
Time heals almost all wounds, especially with wrestling fans. So, yeah.
To what extent, though?
I don't think they're going to put out a Best of Chris Benoit DVD. I don't think to that extent. Now, what should I say? 7 years from now, will they put out a DVD of the Chris Benoit Murders, the Real Story? Yeah, I think at some point, someday. I think they were chomping. I'm sure there's people in the company chomping at the bit to do it now and just trying to figure out how many years will it be before you can do it without being, because there's books out on it already. So I'm sure they want to tell their version of the story. I just don't know that they want to do it just yet. You know what I mean?
Do you think that even though they've really tried to downplay the head injury aspect of it, that once they heard that, they sort of turned a corner in some way?
No. Because
not at all?
No. If anything, I think it concerned them more because the steroids they can blame on personal choice, even though that's BS. But the head injuries, that's inherent with a profession, and that all of a sudden calls the profession into question.
Yeah, but I mean, privately, could they have made? Because a lot of wrestling fans, obviously, when they heard that, I don't want to say that they forgave Chris Benoit, but they found a reason for him acting in a certain way. And do you think that even though they will not publicly say that because of the reasons that you mentioned, once this came out that he had severe brain damage, they may have seen the whole situation slightly differently?
I don't think so. Because they only see things how they affect them. You know what I mean? I don't think there's ever been like, okay, what was Chris going through? It's always, what are we going through? So I don't know that, and I think with Chris, it's like, what did you do to us, Chris? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think they accept steroids or brain injury as an excuse for what he did to us. Which is, not that he killed his wife and his son, but that he provided them with 2 months of bad, really bad publicity, so he didn't hide the drugs, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And you also had a column up on Yahoo.com talking about, actually it was a blog, talking about Sean Sherk being stripped of the title. That's official, so it'll be no longer an interim title fight. It's just a title fight in January, and he will face the winner of the BJ Penn Joe Stevenson match?
I don't know if they're going to make him win one match before he gets the title shot, or they'll go right with his next match, against the winner. I don't know that for sure yet.
Are you also surprised that was done so quietly?
Yeah, I think it was done way too quietly. I think that that's one of the things that's the big difference between them. Their TV. I mean, they're a lot more like WWE than I think their own fan base. Although some of them have it kind of figured out, but they're really a lot more like WWE because WWE doesn't go on TV and talk about their drug suspensions. But if it's Major League Baseball or the NFL or something, obviously they would. They would bring up all those things. So it's if it was HBO, obviously they would do that too. So it's then again, I would have thought that they would have made that Dana would have just come out and made the announcement on the show, which he didn't do. So,
Mick, how you doing?
Hey, Brian, everything is great. Enjoying myself and really looking forward to the big anniversary show tomorrow.
Mick, this is Dave, and we got a bunch of stuff that we could talk about, but one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, since in the last couple of months, you've gone through, I guess, a bunch of different things as far as, kind of your attitude with the business, and you went to developmental. You went to, I think you went to Florida too, right?
Yeah, I went to both places, OVW and Florida.
And what was the message that you were trying to send to the guys, and your feelings for, basically you volunteered for those trips, right? You weren't assigned.
Yeah. In the wake of the Benoit tragedies, I was really trying to figure out a way that I could fit in and be part of the solution. And at first I felt really wanted by the national media. I guess it's kind of good for the ego that you have these national shows calling. But I was watching them, and it was for the most part, outside of a few guys, Bret Hart and Chris Jericho and a couple of others, it seemed to always kind of work its way into wrestlers yelling at each other. And it seemed like so many of the guys were, just caught up in that, two-word catchphrase, roid rage, that I would watch shows, and I just got the feeling that, there's got to be another way to contribute. And I thought, maybe we need some guys who have some experience talking to some of these younger guys about, maybe being a little bit more realistic with their expectations, not just from what they can get out of the business, but from what they can expect, when the business is over. Because I was really drawn by the statistic of not just how many guys had died, under the age of 45, but how many of them had committed suicide. And I thought, man, is your life ever really that bad that you need to, put an end to it? And I think for some guys, I guess the answer was yes. If they don't do certain things, they don't have realistic expectations, and if they don't realize from the onset that there is life after wrestling, and unless you really mess up, it's worth living. So I don't, pretend to have all the answers, and in a lot of cases, I was probably saying things they'd heard before. But I think, when it comes to advice, sometimes it's a matter of hearing a lot of different things, even if they're the same things from different sources, and maybe eventually some of it sinks in. So, I had asked John Laurinaitis, from, I don't know, maybe from about 2 weeks after the Benoit situation, if I might be able to go down and talk to Developmental. And I finally got a chance to do it, and really was glad I did. I felt like people, I felt like people knew that I, was really legitimate in my concern for them, and, I wanted them to know that it wasn't something I was being paid to do, and it wasn't something I was even being asked to do, but it was something I felt strongly about going and talking with them about.
One of the things on that, you brought up the thing about the suicides, and a lot of that comes, I think, it's a really, there's I don't know what it is, but there's that you're performing in front of all those people, you're getting that adulation, and you've gone through the ups and downs. I mean, can you? Again, you had a family, and I mean, you're not that type, but could you see like when your career was winding down, or you were afraid it was winding down, where you could see the emotions of it being really hard to, at least hard to deal with?
It was not easy to deal with, but I was really fortunate that I had other things that I wanted to do. And, the book, Have a Nice Day, had really opened up some doors for me. And even if that hadn't happened, I was kind of given that, the door to being part of the creative team was open. And so I had some things to fall back on. I think, I really felt bad when I found out, that Chris Benoit had never had another job. He'd never done anything, that this was all that he knew, and it wasn't as if he'd branched out and, and made contacts in the entertainment world and, or had anything else that he was looking forward to. And I think part of the problem is, guys can't help but complain when they're on the road, because that's just kind of the nature of what guys do. I can't imagine guys driving several hundred miles without complaining about something. And I think they don't realize, what a kind of a cool world is. I don't mean to paint it as like it's a perfect place, whether it be WWE, WCW, or any, group that travels and puts on a lot of shows, but it is this kind of wild, wonderful world, and I think people find out when they get out of it that, hey, maybe it wasn't as bad as we thought. And I'm trying to come up with this example, and I used it a few weeks ago. I didn't quite hit the nail on the head, but it was, I was thinking about like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, when she finishes up, there's no place like home, there's no place like home. But I think if you're Dorothy, a few weeks after being home, you realize that, cleaning up the hog pen with Hickory and Zeke is probably not going to stack up to, singing with the Munchkins and killing wicked witches and meeting wizards. And in a sense, I think that's what, the wrestling world is. It's this, unbelievable place. Some of it's, terrible, but a lot of it's wonderful. And I think when guys get out of it, after having complained about it, their entire careers, they probably, I mean, I can't imagine somebody looking back on it and not thinking, at least in part, that it was, it was some of the best times of their lives.
So what was some of the advice that you gave them, and how receptive were the guys to it?
I think they were receptive. I'm not sure, I don't know if it changed any lives or not, but, there's three main things I was talking about. And as I'm saying that, I'm trying to think of what the third one was. I know one of it was, drug use, and the second one was about, planning for the financial future. And I think the third one was just kind of appreciating just how hard they'd worked to get there, and the idea that, hey, if this is not baseball where if you hit 300, you've got a job. I mean, this is kind of subjective, and sometimes it depends on one person's whim. And I would tell them, listen, I say, Vince may be the smartest guy I've ever met, and I'm not just saying that because he pays me. I've always felt that way. I said, but keep in mind, when I got there, the biggest the biggest stars in the company were supposed to be Mark Merrow and Mark Henry. And I told them the story that I'd written in Have a Nice Day, where Jimmy Miranda, who was the, he was the shirt and concession guy, came up to me and he said, the company wants to make a Mankind T-shirt. And I saw a list. There was like 30 items, and under Mankind they had a shirt checked off. But right next to it was Barry Windham as a stalker, and he had like 15 items checked off. And Mark Henry had every single item you could imagine. They were looking to market Mark Henry in every way possible. And while I was having this conversation with Miranda, Stone Cold Steve Austin walked up and he said, "Hey, Miranda, I'm on a T-shirt with Stone Cold." And Jimmy Miranda kind of got flustered. And Steve said, "What the hell's wrong, Miranda?" And he goes, "Steve, don't take this personally. It's just that, the office doesn't really see any marketing potential in you." So, I want guys to know that Vince is, he's occasionally wrong, and just because, somebody decides you don't have what it takes doesn't mean you should be looking at your career like it's a failure. I mean, maybe that's kind of, philosophical DDP type of stuff, but I believe pretty firmly in it. I think the difference between me and DDP is I think that you can't just be whatever you want to be if you will it and work hard enough, that sometimes, especially in our business, there are outside influences, and certainly, I could have done everything exactly the same, but if it hadn't been for a guy like Jim Ross, really, petitioning on my part, I may have never gotten the break, that came my way. Or when I started, if it hadn't been the Undertaker kind of going to bat for me, or if it hadn't been Vince finally becoming a big believer in the Mankind character, things wouldn't have worked out. So that was one of the things I was talking about, and I was talking about, pill usage and the idea that, it's really hard to get out of WWE or any type of professional wrestling without, having some experience with it, but that it's there to help you. It's not there to get high on, and it's not there to build up some type of a tolerance to. And I gave an example of being on a vacation in Dutch Wonderland, and I went down this little raft ride with my kids. It was the first time they'd been on a ride of that magnitude, and they were really excited about it. And I said, "Dad, let's do it again. And I got up, and my knee kind of went out of its socket, And it's kind of like a semi-regular occurrence. I hear the music. I'll finish up real quickly. So I shifted it back in. To make a long story short, if I hadn't have had a pain pill with me, at the hotel, the vacation would be over. So there is a time and a place for it, kind of saved my vacation. But at the same time, if I'd had a tolerance and I took stuff just because I felt like getting a buzz once in a while, that one pill wouldn't have done anything.
Mick, when you were down there in Ohio Valley and Florida Championship Wrestling, what were your thoughts on the way the developmental system is run in general?
Well, when I was in Ohio Valley, I wasn't. I was there just to talk. I didn't actually see any of the talent performing. When I went to Florida, I got a tour by Steve Kern showing me how the arena was going to shape up and all the construction they were doing on it. And I got to see a lot of the talent working out. And one of the things I was really impressed with, I didn't quite get it when Steve was explaining to me, and I didn't get it until I saw it on video, was they were going around kind of doing these free-form wrestling interviews. Because, in the old days, guys, knew how to cut a 30-second interview or a 1-minute or a lengthy interview if that was the need. But they were kind of doing these things, almost like an acting class, saying, okay, imagine that you are waiting to use the bathroom and the champion comes out of the toilet stall or something, it's something that ridiculous. And there was a lot of ad-libbing going on, a lot of people working together, kind of interacting and playing off each other. And they did 5 or 6 of these, all these different scenarios. And I thought, man, this is really good training, because in so many of the things, especially, in the late 90s, before there was such tight scripting going on, a lot of the guys, popularity could hinge on their ability to work off people and improvise. And I think that, that just as a general observation is kind of indicative of the things they're doing there, and preparing people, not just to have matches, but to be part of a wrestling show. So I was really impressed with quite a few of the wrestlers they had as well in the ring.
Now, one thing that you said to me a little while ago is that you were, I guess, at first when you found out, or your last match with Jonathan Coachman,
right,
you were talking that it might be the last match of your career, and if it is, you're okay with it, whereas at one point maybe you weren't.
Yeah, I've done a complete 180 on that, because I think I did one interview since that time, and I was like, it completely ruined it, because I'd had that match at Vengeance, the 5-way, and I thought, I'm not going to go out and say, hey, that may have been my last match ever, but my feeling was, if that was my last match, then it was, it was a good match, it may be a very good match, not a great match, not something that people remember forever, but the odds of me being in a pay-per-view main event again are kind of minuscule, and I thought, that's not a bad way to go out. And then I had to open up my mouth when I was in Philadelphia, and I told Vince that, I was going to be coming by the Nassau Coliseum with my kids, because, my 4- and 6-year-old, they like some of the wrestlers, like Big Daddy V, for example, and they've only been, sorry about that, they'd only been with me one other time to a show. So I showed up, and it turned out, I thought they were kidding when they said they have a match for me. And I had this match with the coach, which if those of you didn't see, you don't need to see. And I left there, and I thought, I ruined this whole last match scenario. Now I can't live with the fact that my last match was against Coach with a leprechaun as the referee. But the more I thought about it, the more I looked at, I realized how special it was to have all 4 of my kids at a show for the first time, and to actually be wrestling on the show. And I looked out, and my kids were in the second row. And, my older kids, they were kind of proud, but they'd seen me wrestle a lot, when they were younger. My 4-year-old was just beaming, and my 6-year-old was booing me.
And with the hornswoggle.
and it was, I just keep thinking of their faces. And don't get me wrong, it was a happy boo. He was really happy to be booing me. And I thought, that's that's kind of a priceless memory. And I'd like to have another chance to do one more really good thing. But if that doesn't happen, I will, kind of consider the chance to have had all 4 kids watch me wrestle. And for a 4- and 6-year-old, that was a great match. I won't even save the video, so they don't find out any different. But I think, looking at like 98 or 99 when my kids would be in the ring, and I had that horrific match with The Rock and didn't think anything of it until, months later, that, I guess my priorities have changed, and you realize that, hey, maybe this was the better situation to have my kids in, a completely harmless match, and a little bit of fun and leprechaun thrown in for good measure.
So now, in your mind, physically, in your mind, are you planning on wrestling again, or because it's hard for me, because I wasn't really expecting that from you. The idea of last match, even though you retired 7 years ago, but I always figured once every year or two you're going to come out and have this gruesome bloody match just because you're Mick Foley.
Yeah. I guess the one thing I've going for me has been proven that if you put me out in the ring with one of the best workers in the the business and do a match that's my specialty, we can come through. But this past year is a rough one on me physically. I found out several of my knee ligaments are kind of holding on by a thread, and I had a real rough time with several herniated discs. And it's kind of thinking, maybe that's Mother Nature sending me a signal. And I do have ideas, and there was one that I actually had a meeting planned with Vince and written down and all that. And I actually called up and canceled because I thought, it wasn't the right time to propose an idea, especially with Flair's return being, kind of similar in nature to what I was going to propose. But I think, next year I'm going to propose something else, and it's pretty major and hopefully, pretty emotional and thought-provoking. And, and I hope it goes, but if it doesn't, it won't be like I'll feel like I need closure. I'd like to do one more big thing just because I love going out there and I love kind of telling a story and getting people involved, but it won't be the end of the world if it doesn't happen.
Now, you mentioned also, of course, tomorrow is the 15th anniversary of Raw, and
right.
Your mentality between the 10th anniversary and 15th anniversary is very different, and what makes it different?
Oh, man, maybe I've changed a little bit over the last 5 years, and, I'm not quite as rebellious as I was, and I was still mad this past spring when I thought they didn't do as much with the book as they could have, and I'll really be the only guy to ever go down in literary history or wrestling history to be told that they don't connect with the fans at a time when my book was number 6 on the New York Times list. So I felt like I kind of got a bad deal there, but it's kind of, I'm flattered to be named in this if they're naming four people and it's Stone Cold and it's Austin and it's Trish and it's me, that's it's pretty good company to be in. And even over the last several months, when The Rock would say things and he'd be very complimentary towards me, and even when I'd look at stuff that Stone Cold has said and guys who to me were way above who I was in the ring, that they kind of think of me as a peer, it's pretty flattering. So I'm just glad to be invited, and I realized if I were to no-show the 15th year anniversary, that there probably would not be an invitation coming to the 20th year. I think I ruffled a couple feathers by turning down the invite last time.
One of the things that you're doing right now is now you're selling a lot of your merchandise. You're opening up kind of a store. I mean, what's the story on all that?
Yeah. I wanted people to know that's legit stuff. I'd had all these things. I was like a compulsive collector of career memorabilia, and a lot of it, would end up at kids I met through Make-A-Wish and different groups. I wanted people to have my stuff, and I realized it meant more to other people than it would to me. Like, I need probably one box of things. Like, I need one pair of Cactus Jack tights 30 years from now to look back on. I don't need 3 or 4, and, I need a couple of bloody Wanted Dead or Alive shirts. I don't need 10. And I just, I always had this feeling that people might actually want something I had, even if it was not even a wrestling item, even if it was like a children's, videotape, like, because I know when I was a kid, if Thurman Munson, the Yankee catcher, had given me a T-shirt, I would have thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And so we put some stuff out there, and kind of it felt good to prove my 13 or 15-year-old wrong. They're like, oh, nobody's going to want your stuff, Dad. And it turns out that there are people who want it. And even though some of the game match use stuff has been a little pricey, the people are really thrilled, and the feedback's been really flattering. I think we've got like 100% feedback and some really nice things being said. So there is some stuff out there, and it ranges in price, from a very very reasonable 8x10 or action figure to stuff that is kind of expensive. And I'm not allowed to auction it per my contract, but I am allowed to sell things. So if anyone wants to look at a unique gift item, that's I think you go on eBay under the Mick Foley, or just maybe Mick Foley Wrestling Store. I don't know, because I don't have that computer know-how. But it is out there, and it is real stuff. And if someone's looking for a unique item, it's I don't know. I'm pretty proud of the fact that everyone's happy with what they're getting.
I got a question for Bryan, and it's kind of on this. Do you think, as a professional wrestler, because I've noticed this, that wrestlers would be much happier without computer know-how than having it?
I think it really depends on the wrestlers, but I just think that some wrestlers would be better off if they didn't have the internet. Mick, I've got a two-part question here. Somebody in email wants to know, the WWE 24/7 Legends show, are you guys allowed to say pretty much whatever you want, or are you given any sort of limitations about what you can talk about?
No, absolutely nothing. Okay, that's answer to one of them.
So that's the easy answer there. And the second one is, I wanted to hear the story about Taz and Kurt Angle, you just told us, I think, this month, when Taz was first coming to the company and he was going to have the match with Angle at the Royal Rumble.
Jeez, I don't think Kurt wants this story being talked about. He's kind of embarrassed that it ever happened. But, I don't know what's showing on Legends right now, but the truth is, I mean, I guess they have the ability to edit something if they really aren't happy with it. But I know in an upcoming thing, there was a conversation got pretty heated with me and Michael Hayes. Really? Concerning the whole, Vince is dead angle. And I couldn't use words strong enough to explain how much I hated it. And I used some of those words to Vince directly, and it got pretty heated. And I hope they keep it in its entirety. But I really enjoy the concept that it's just supposed to be guys. It's supposed to give the fans like the ability to eavesdrop on conversations that wrestlers might have if they were sitting around a bar. So I do enjoy doing it, and it's fun. And one of the things I liked, several months ago was listening to actually Eric Bischoff giving his take on the Monday Night Wars. And from what I understand, he was a lot more open. Not that he wasn't open in his book, but I think part of the problem with working with a writer is a lot of what comes out depends on the rapport with that a wrestler or a wrestling figure has with their writer. And in this case, maybe it was a better forum for him to express his views and to be really open. So I hope I get invited back to all those things, because I only live like an hour and a half from the office. And as far as the Kurt Angle story, I guess Kurt had a concern that Taz was going to try something on him, during Taz's debut at the Garden. That was when I did the match with Triple H at the Royal Rumble. And Kurt, like I said, I don't think he wants this being said, because last time I talked to him about it, he couldn't believe that this conversation even took place. But he kind of pulled me aside and he asked me what to do if Taz tried something on him. And I just kind of said, Kurt, I think you're an Olympic gold medalist. I said, I don't know. And I'm not putting Taz down at all, but it just didn't. First of all, it wouldn't occur to me that Taz would try something. And the second thing is, I thought Kurt was, able to handle just about anybody in the world, including Taz, if that did happen. But he was, he was really concerned. And it's funny.
Maybe somebody put the paranoia in his head. You never know. People playing a rib on him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was new in the business at the time.
Yeah, he was pretty new, and it may have been a simple thing with guys kind of stirring the pot, which is not unusual. But sorry about that. I'm having dinner at a friend's house. Same guys who appeared in the old high school movies with me, the home movies. And
how's
so
the roof?
I apologize, I'm burping. Yeah. So that story is pretty funny.
Wasn't Taz on the panel when you told that story and he just laughed?
Yeah, that's right. Has this been aired yet? The thing? With
yeah,
Taz?
this was on this month.
This was the Heat Seekers one, right?
I actually didn't see this. Somebody just told me about this, the story and Taz's reaction.
Yeah, the Heat Seekers was great. I guess my only problem with the Heat Seekers Part 1 is that I was apparently the only guy in the business who actually liked some of the people who were, on the Heat Seeker list. And then they got involved, with some other guys. And when Vince's name came up, that's when the conversation got kind of heated. But yeah, I believe Taz was there. And I never realized, for example, that Taz still had a lot of bitterness over how his wrestling career worked out. I thought, by virtue of the fact that he'd become a real good announcer and kind of a fixture in the company, that he'd be fine with all that. And I never knew that he really resented the way it turned out from a wrestling perspective.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I guess, in answer, just to reiterate what I said about question number 1, yeah, guys are not told what to say at all. And it's very interesting and a lot of fun to be on the panel.
It changed your views on Eric Bischoff, didn't it?
Yeah. It did, because I realized, I knew he was had a lot, he was a pretty bright guy, and that he wasn't afraid to try new things. But from glancing at his book and hearing what he said over the years, a lot of it didn't seem to stack up to his memory didn't seem to stack up to the facts. And in this case, there was a lot of things I did not know that he was completely legitimate on. And like, I guess to that, he never really realized how much it bothered me, to have him, giving away the finish, when I won that title. Yeah. So again, I mean, I'm not here to plug 24/7, but it is a good show, and I think people are, it'd be, if I was a wrestling fan, back in the days when I was, this would be like the answer to my wrestling prayers to hear wrestlers talking that openly about, interesting and controversial subjects.
It was the Badasses show.
Was that the one?
It's the one, yeah.
How did I not make that list? How was I not on there?
Another thing is, a few weeks ago, we're building up the Hell in a Cell match with Undertaker and Batista. JBL made some comments about how you were never the same after that match, and I wrote, the thing is that you had your best years after that match, but in fact, in your mind, you really were never the same after that match.
Yeah, I definitely thought there was a lot of credence to that, because before Hell in a Cell, I mean, I was aware of that some of the stuff I was doing was, it was painful and dangerous. There might be a price to pay for it, but like it never really occurred to me that I could be hurt that seriously, or that the things I was doing were having an effect on my family. I mean, I kind of had blinders on in one sense, because I was always about the performance, and I think from the day, from the moment that that Cell match happened. I mean, I guess if I had to put a moment on it, it would be when I finally called my wife. It was several hours after the fact, and I believe I'd been to the hospital already, and I had not called after my match like I always did, and my wife was desperately trying to get through. Maybe it was before I went to the hospital, because it was Dave Hebner who said, your wife has gotten in contact with, she really needs you to call. And when I got called up, I mean, she was yelling at me, and she's crying, and she said, you can't do this to us, you can't do this to your family. And the kids were, I guess, pretty devastated, because they, it's weird, they'd seen me on wrestling, selling and getting hurt, but it just, I guess, hit home. It was so much more realistic than anything they'd seen, that they were pretty torn up. And it was within a couple days that we were looking at different houses and, cheaper houses, and it was the first time I really started thinking about doing something else after wrestling. So maybe in that sense it was positive. But from that point on, I think wrestling was more of a business where, we had that great streak, for like a year and a half where almost every building was sold out even before the card was announced. And I remember I'd go out, and it was no longer about, I'm going to have the best match possible, I'm going to try to, be this, steal every show I'm on. It was about, there's 20,000 people out here, and I need to do what I can to ensure that I can be out there tomorrow in front of another 20,000. And I guess maybe it had something to do with the fact that the money really picked up around that time. But I think that had it not been for Hell in a Cell, I still would have been under the illusion that I was, unstoppable, at least, for a little while longer.
What got you, I know that Undertaker was hurt and you were afraid of having a bad match, but what got you, where did the idea of those bumps come from, and the idea that if you did them, that you would actually be able to possibly get up from them? Because I know the second one didn't go exactly as planned, but
right.
But the first one, easily could have, ended your life, let alone your career, and certainly ended the match. And yet, the match planned out.
Yeah,
what gave you the confidence to take that bump, I guess, is another way to ask it.
Well, let me go back. I'll quote my wife. This is in dealing with the matches I had in Japan. This is like, I think specifically after the Kawasaki Dream, which is now, forever known as the death match, when she said, Mick, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, sure. She goes, couldn't you have picked a different mentor? Talking about the influence Terry Funk had on me. And I remember being up in the office. The only time Terry and I were ever at the office together is a lot of fans don't know that WWE wrestlers aren't very often in the WWE offices. But we both happened to be there, and we were working out at the WWE gym, and I had this match coming up with The Undertaker. And I was really worried because I was not a cage match wrestler. And at that time, I just, I thought of the cage as like a bigger, the cell as a bigger cage. And I guess since then everyone's kind of realized it has kind of like a life and an aura of its own. But there'd only been one other match. And Terry and I watched it at the offices, and it was Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. And they just tore the house down, and Shawn was, about 70 or 80 pounds lighter than I was and a much better athlete and a guy that was, seemed like a more natural matchup inside a cage. And I just looked at that and I said, Terry, what in the world am I going to do? And he said, Cactus, I think you ought to start the match on top of the cage. And we kind of laughed, we both kind of laughed about it. And then I looked at Terry and said, I think I could do it. And I remember saying, and he realized I was serious. And then we came up with the scenario that, hey, and then after you're thrown off, maybe you climb back on top of it. I think that may have been the point where we were still joking around and saying, hey, Cactus, maybe afterward you can climb back on top of that cage. And that's the point, I think, where I said, I think I can do it. And that's kind of where the seed was planted. But had it not been for Terry Funk suggesting that ridiculous scenario, I never would have gone through it. I don't think it would have ever entered my mind. And, my whole career would have turned out differently.
We have about 90 seconds left, so we're going to very quickly go to Brian in New Hampshire, who has a quick question for Mick. Brian, what's up?
Hi, Mick. Big fan of yours. I was wondering, when you were down in Florida, if there were any particular guys that stood out to you, and you remembered anything about the kid they ran a vignette for on ECW this week, Kofi Kingston?
Mick, did you hear that? I don't know if we've lost Mick Foley or if we've lost myself. Dave, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Apparently we've lost Mick.
Maybe we lost Mick. I don't know. They're bringing in Kofi Kingston, and I saw him in OVW. He was only there a couple of weeks. He spent most of his time in the Atlanta and the Florida promotion. I don't know. I had heard all these raves about him, and they brought him in with Harry Smith, and he didn't stand out to me, for whatever that was worth. I mean, it wasn't like he was bad, but he was just, I don't know, I had been built up with the idea that he was the best guy in developmental at the time, or one of the 2 or 3 best, him and Cody Reynolds and Sean Spears. And I didn't think he was as good as, certainly not as good as Sean Spears at the time, but he could have improved a lot since then.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for the call, and Dave, of course, thanks for doing the show this week, and we apologize for losing Mick Foley there in the last 30 seconds, but we're pretty much out of time. So we'll talk to you guys again next week. You listen to Observer Live on the Sports Byline Radio Network.